Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Business of Success. We had a little pause where we recapped the previous 5 episodes, and we're back today with a guest and kind of a really interesting conversation that caught me a little bit by surprise, to be honest. We're here talking to Dr. Pooja Patel, who's the founder of Aging Together, and she brought to my attention a caregiving conundrum, right? And I think as somebody who's really passionate about women in the workplace, I thought I really had it covered. And I didn't. And I realized that there's a whole nother side of caretaking that I'm really excited to chat with you about today, Pooja, and dive into for the audience. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can you just start off, let everyone know a little bit about yourself, your journey, and about your company and what you are striving to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, my name is Pooja. I am a double board certified occupational therapist and gerontologist. And I've spent about a decade working in the hospitals, primarily working with older adults and their families. And over the past 5 years or so, I really grew a passion for supporting our families and caregivers in the community rather than in the hospital. Working in the hospital is primarily like in crisis mode. Something's happened and they're coming in, and now we're like throwing a ton of information at them in a very short period of time. And then there's no follow up, right? They get lost to follow up because we discharge them and they're on their way. And a lot of times that looks different for family to family, but a lot of times these families are going home with, like, I just have to take care of this person now. They were fine until last week and I didn't even have to think about it. And that's when caregiving happens after a crisis, right? But a lot of times caregiving starts without a crisis and it adds up over time. And a lot of people don't think about it. They don't identify as caregivers. They don't identify that that's what they're doing. And they're not prepared or aware of, one, the toll it takes, and two, the resources and services that are available for them. And so that led me to starting Aging Together, which is an educational consultancy. And it really just works on educating and preparing families and family caregivers to proactively approach aging and care.
I love that. What made you go into this world of, looking across sort of this later stage of life for things that families deal with? What was your interest in?
Yeah, a lot of times when people think of occupational therapy, they think of children. And, when I went into school, I really wanted to work in pediatrics. That was sort of that's what I thought I wanted to do. And then once I went into school and did the classes and then the labs and the rotations, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I could work with children all the time. And so that was where I kind of leaned into how I was raised. And so I was raised around all 4 of my grandparents and then also all of their siblings. And so all of the elders in our family. My grandma's still with us. And so, I just was surrounded by so much love and care and just a lot of elders around me. And I think part of that was just kind of ingrained in me to take care of our elders, which we don't see a lot of in the US, unfortunately. And so I think that just kind of pulled me towards that. And then once I started working, the more and more I worked with this population, I started just growing very fond of it. And then eventually through my experiences in the hospital, I really felt like we need to take care of the families too, and not just the older adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think honestly, I myself in my life haven't gone through the elder caretaking journey yet, but we had for the first time this year an instance where we had one of our, kids' grandparents who was a little bit disabled for a period of time. Not totally, it was not so severe like a crisis as you mentioned, but it did kind of change things for a moment, right? Where we had a glimpse of what we really, really need to be prepared for. So I love that you've taken this course. And I will say, I don't feel educated in this area. And I think many people don't feel educated in this area, which is great, which is what you're seeking out to do. We think of mothers. I mean, we're getting there, right? Lately, you're hearing more about moms in the workplace, or, even there's menopause support coming up slowly into benefits. And we hope more often. What happens in the workplace with elder care? What exists today, or what can we be prepared for if you are somebody that is potentially a future caretaker?
I hate to say this, but not much. if anything. When it comes to your own parents, a lot of places FMLA might cover some leave depending on your workplace. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of resources for family caregivers who are caring for elders. You brought up like mothers and parenting, and becoming a parent is a life decision. And so you plan for it. And our workplaces plan for it because you go on to leave, whether it's the ridiculous 3 weeks or the 3 months, right? And so there's a plan for it. Workplaces are structured around coverage for that, right? You don't see that a lot for caregiving employees because you don't plan for that. It just happens. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, I need to take mom to an appointment because she can't go by herself. Oh, but shoot, they're only open from 9 to 5. Well, I have work 9 to 5. And how am I going to take them? Okay, I'm going to have to take a whole day off of work so that I can go take mom to an appointment for an hour, right? It's not as flexible for most people. I'm not saying all people, but for most people, they can't just leave work, take their mom to their appointment, and then go back to work. And it's just not as normalized. I think people don't talk about it. If this were the case for a child, like, hey, my kid's sick, school called, I need to go pick him up, you're out of work, right? Like you get to leave in most places. And if they don't, that's still your kid. So you're going to be like, I'm out, like I'm leaving. I don't think we perceive elder caregiving in the same perspective or in the same like urgency per se, kind of. And so it becomes one of those nice to haves instead of, hey, we need support for this so people can actively take care of their families without feeling like they're going to lose their job or that they have to take an entire day off. And so I think that's sort of what I've seen. There is a lot of work being done to add more resources for caregiving employees through like ERGs and through employee wellness programs and all of that kind of stuff. But I have yet to see one that's like well-defined and really supportive.
That's unfortunate. And you mentioned something about FMLA might cover you. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because I feel like you and I did about that a little bit of like, it might not. And can you tell us a little bit of the contingencies here at play that people might not be aware of? Because if you just assume I'll take my FMLA and I'm covered,
Yeah, I don't know all of the stipulations for it, but speaking from personal experience, I thought FMLA covered any family leave. Like I didn't think twice of like, oh, who does this apply to? Who does this not apply to? Like family's family, right? And culturally, our family extends to our in-laws, right? Well, guess what? FMLA doesn't apply to in-laws.
I know.
So so my father-in-law had to undergo open heart surgery a few years ago. And as the only healthcare provider in the family, I was like, hey, I work with this, I deal with this. And at that time, I worked full-time in acute care in the hospital, working with post-cardiac surgery patients. So like, I knew exactly what he'd be going through, right? And so I was like, I'm the one who needs to be there. I can support him. I can help with medical translation between doctors, medical terms, and like the family, and all of this stuff, right? And I was like, oh, I'll just take some FMLA for a few weeks so that I can cover this. And I couldn't. You can't apply FMLA to your in-laws. It's only for your parents, your spouse of kids. And then actually I have to double check. I don't think it even extends to siblings. I think it's literally just like your parents, your spouse, or your kids. And so it was one of those eye-opening moments where I was like, dang, like I can't, so I had to take a personal leave, which I was lucky and fortunate that I had access to, but it was an unpaid personal leave, right? And so think about how many people can't afford that and can't do that and don't have access to it in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, that was my experience with it. And that was very eye-opening to me because I was like, there's no way. And then I had to look into it and HR had to explain it to me. And I was just like, I was in this moment where I was like so stressed. I was like, are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, I think this is a good like note for anyone listening because like we just make assumptions and I used to work in HR and I remember years ago there were other kind of leave acts coming in. Family Medical Leave Act was one, for example, and I did like my internship thesis on Family Medical Leave Act. And I remember I was like, learning about FMLA. And there's also other provisions. I mean, people don't often realize, I think like you have to have a full year of employment and, certain, and it's 12 weeks, it's unpaid often, right? It doesn't have to be paid. It is
Mm-hmm.
a section of your role, but it is not, salary necessarily. So
Yeah.
I think as we like lean into that as employees, you got to almost think and plan ahead for these scenarios, which is what you're trying to do with your work, which I love. And I want to dig in a little bit to some of the ways that you're embarking on the education, because that would be really interesting to me. Like, what are some of the things and the practices that you're employing? Is it working with individual families? Is it working with companies? Is it a little bit of both, right? How are you actually providing that education?
Yeah, I do both. It's multifaceted. So I'll work directly with families. I developed a proactive care planning workbook that I help navigate families through. So it's part education, part discussion, and then part putting pen to paper. So it's like a 3-part process. And we really talk about, things like long-term care planning, rehab needs, aging in place or moving into a supportive living environment, things like end of life care, which is huge culturally, right? Because we don't like to talk about it, but then we have so many rituals and traditions that I personally don't know about. So I need to know if my parents or in-laws expect us to do any of it.
Right.
And then emergency care planning. So a lot of like what happens during an emergency, whether it's a personal medical emergency or an environmental emergency, right? We see more and more of these climate issues that come up, and it's really important that we know that our parents have a way to get somewhere safe if there's an emergency environmentally. And people don't think about that either.
Right.
And so there's just so many aspects of it that people just don't think about because it doesn't happen. And that's part of what leads to so much crisis intervention. A lot of it can be prevented. And I've seen that over and over again. So it's really just based on education and then coaching and putting pen to paper with the individuals and families. And then I do offer workshops and trainings through like ERGs or EAP programs or like corporate lunch and learns, like whatever it might be. And that is more so like general education of like, here are the things you should be thinking about. Here's how you go about thinking about this or planning for this. They range from anywhere from like a specific topic area that they're looking for, whether it's like dementia or chronic disease management or resources, right? To all the way to let's do a 2-hour lunch and learn workshop where we go through an actual proactive care plan and talk about some stuff and put pen to paper, right? So it does vary depending on what people are looking for. But yeah, I mean, I do wish more companies would be willing to supply this sort of education and resources to their employees, because I don't think there's enough.
Yeah. And I feel like everybody would value it. I mean, not every single employee is going to be at the stage where they feel like they need it, but you can never really be prepared. As you mentioned, this is not something that you wait 9 months and is coming, right? Can be very abrupt.
Well, I think that's the issue, right? Like, I think people don't think they need to think about it. And then all of a sudden they're like, shoot, I should have thought about it.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that I always get is, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I wrote a whole book on it. I'm like, you don't know when the bridge is coming, And so how do you plan for that bridge? And I always use that analogy because I hear it so much. And I'm like, if you've never crossed this bridge before, you don't know how long it is. You don't know how high it is. You don't know how much gas you're going to need to go from one side to the other. You don't know if the roads are icy or if there's water issues or if there's going to be traffic or if there's an exit somewhere or if there's a place to kind of step aside and like pull over in an emergency, or you don't know anything about this bridge and you're just going to get on it without knowing anything. You're not, right? Like you're going to figure all that out if you're going on a trip and have a bridge to cross. So I think that's like one way that I like to present it is like, you need to know, or at least think about what you're going to be walking into, whether that's in a year or whether that's in 15 years. But if you don't know, you can't plan for it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so much to think about. Let's talk about this a little bit also from that perspective of like, who carries these burdens. The first episode here at the Success, we talked a lot about women as caretakers for children, that they sort of carry the load. And there's recent studies from Catalyst that like 455,000 women left the workplace in 2025, which, happened in big numbers in COVID, again, due to caretaking. Now, when I read that article, I think differently about it. Like caretaking can mean so many things, right? So I'm kind of curious, do you see a broader or heavier burden placed on women than men typically in these challenging times when people do have to take on responsibility?
Yes, 1000%. The majority of family caregivers are women, and they're often the daughters, the spouses, and the daughter in laws. And so, yeah, 100% more women than men. There are increasing numbers of male caregivers now. I think a lot of it comes down to boundaries that more and more women are placing or setting, I should say. And then the other comes down to there's just not enough caregivers, and so men are having to step up. I will say when it comes to spousal care, it's probably even. Most spouses tend to take care of each other as needed. If they're still together in their 80s, 90s, they're taking care of each other. But it's more so when it comes down to the children, it's primarily the daughters.
Yeah, right. Which also is very interesting because culturally, I think both of you and I are both South Asian. Our norms are kind of set very high, I think, to take care of parents. But it was almost flipped, right? I was just talking about this yesterday, actually. My sister was like, if you grew up in another country where it was a patriarchal society and you might have lived with your husband's parents,
Yeah.
the husband's lineage is going to possibly be the caretaker, right? But interestingly, today, where people don't always live together in these joint families and stuff, we might see that shift, right? We might see, like what you're saying, daughters, even in South Asian culture, coming up as the caretaker, even if they wouldn't have been the person that you lived with, right? Which is, I think anymore, we don't see that full joint family arrangement as often, but it's still there. But it's also like a mental expectation, right? And I'm sure there's other cultures that have this too, that of who is going to take care of me, in my old.
Yeah. I mean, even when it comes down the husband's lineage, it's the daughters-in-law who are providing the care, right? And so regardless, I mean, my husband and I talk about it all the time. We're both the eldest children. We're the primary responsible authority for both parents. And so it's like, we already know this about our life, is this expectation that we already do take care of both of our parents, right? And so you think about how much extra, I don't want to say like stress, but how much extra thought that requires in our life when we're thinking of, even little things like, maybe we can go live somewhere for 6 months or a year and like go explore. We're young, like let's go travel, right? But then it's like, okay, well, what if something happens to mom and dad, right? And it's like, shoot, like we can't be that far away. So I think like what you were saying, like that expectation and just thinking from that lens all the time, I don't want to blanket statement this, but I don't think a lot of sons think about that, or like younger siblings think about that. I'll say there's a little bit of that too. It doesn't matter son or daughter, but it's usually the older sibling. And then a lot of times it's the daughters. But, in our case, like both our younger siblings are packed up and moved out. They don't really think about it. So it's very much like, all right, like who's really responsible?
Yeah. And I think it also like looking across communities, right? So obviously we have a South Asian kind of background, but I think there are a lot of communities that set the bar very high for achievement, right? And make, hey, children, whatever you are, we want you to be, the top achievement or top achievers. With achievement comes being busy, comes jobs that are full time, comes employment usually. And with that may not come time, right? So it becomes, in a weird way, it's a mismatch. It's like achievement plus caretaking. They don't always match, right? And I think that is just something that we should all be aware of too, as like families of high achieving individuals. You have to build a plan in, because if it comes at a startling time and you're not able to, like you said, take the time off, or not able to have like a paid leave or whatever, it can be a burden. It can be a burden on your family, right?
Right. And I think like we have to think of in terms of generational differences too, right? So our parents who, like I said, I grew up with all four of my grandparents. I watched my mom take care of two of them, right? And so like realistically, like that's the expectation that I've seen and that I internalize. And yet at the same time, they raised me to get educated. They understand that, my husband and I both have strong careers and we're very busy and all of this stuff, right? But then when it comes down to it, it's like, hey, can you come help me? Right. And so then I'm jumping on a flight and going home. And that was part of, when we talk about work, like this was part of why I decided to leave full-time work for someone else and start something on my own, because I have that flexibility now to be like, all right, last year I had to fly home 5 different times because something came up, right? And it's like, okay, I can do this now because I can work from there. And so I think that's another thing to think about when we also think about like remote work, flexible work. Paid leave is not the only solution, although that would be lovely. But there's all these other options too that I think could be helpful in a lot of fields, except healthcare.
Right. Well, I mean, the ones where you have to be present, but no, I think that's a transition point, because I was thinking about, I had an employee. I worked at a tech company, and I did have an employee who had to go and take her mom to medical appointments. It was like once a month, but she would have to go for like the whole day. She had to go to the suburbs from downtown Chicago and go, and it was quite an undertaking. And I remember that we were just like able to manage it, because in tech, you are kind of used to, I mean, you were anyways, mostly remote work at that time. And it was in the post-COVID years. We were just like, you'll figure it out. You can come back and, you can move your meetings or whatever. But where those jobs exist that you cannot, right? Mm-hmm. There are more challenges. I'm kind of curious if you have perspective on maybe both sides of the coin, right? Like, what are some practices? Like you mentioned flexible work, you mentioned remote work. Remote work might not work if you're a doctor, right? Like a lot of my friends that are like, I'm a surgeon, I can't do remote work. What could you do? Let's just take that one side of the coin. What could employers do in a situation where somebody does have an in-office job where they cannot leave? What are any good sort of employment practices that you've seen?
I've had a few experiences myself. None of these options are like gold standard. Like, I think we're talking about like bare minimum options where it's like, at least try and make your employee's life a little easier instead of saying no. And then they're stressed about how their parent is going to be taken care of. So, not caregiving related, but I had another commitment or obligation during work hours, and I was working full time at the hospital, right? And so we have set hours, and we're supposed to see XYZ patients and all this stuff, right? And so they're like, we can't just like let you go. Like, that's not how, So I was offered the ability to work extra hours on the other days to make up for the time lost on that day, right? And so I see that as like a bare minimum option. Like, can I just make up the hours at a different day if I can't get the time off? Alternatively, I've seen where it's a possibility working a weekend day to make up a weekday that's missed, right? That doesn't work if you work in schools. That doesn't work anywhere where it's a Monday through Friday requirement to show up, right? But you think of places like tech companies, any sort of company where you could work on a weekend and get a lot of work done without having to be on meetings or calls or anything like that, because everyone else is off. But can you put in 8 hours on a Saturday from home to make up for the time that you lost in person on that other day, right? So I think those are some of what I consider as like flexible work opportunities that are sort of bare minimum to make it a little less stressful for your employee. Now, of course, that doesn't really offer an alternative. I mean, I should say that offers an alternative. That doesn't really offer like a true supportive solution, right? Because the employee still has to put in those extra hours. Now they're cutting into their evening routines or their weekend plans and routines. And now they have to still stress about that. And then if they have children on top of that, like now they're trying to figure out different dinner time routines maybe, or who's going to watch or who's going to entertain the kids if I have to work all day on Saturday, right? And I think that's where, like, I think it depends on the family units, of course, and how involved both parents are and all of that kind of stuff. But that's not a workplace's decision to make. And, that impacts an employee's life too. And so I don't know. I don't know what the appropriate solutions are beyond paid leave, because we know that paid leave is a very hard battle. Anything that offers somewhat alternatives so that the person can still take that time to go do what they need to do.
Yeah. And I think it's like just not to be confused with vacation, right? I think unfortunately people think, well, you have your vacation. Vacation also is a necessary thing for people to take like a rest from work, right? And if we use vacation as a tool for caregiving, you don't get that actual needed break, right? Mental break. So there is like, that's an area that I think the waters can be a little bit muddier for folks to say, like, in tech companies, they'll say we have unlimited time off. Okay, fine. Right. But what does that really mean? Is that qualified? I know that this company I worked at a couple of years ago, they started to give away days off as like prizes for little contests that we would do. And I thought it was actually a really good like thing, an incentive, honestly, because everybody wants the day off, whether they're caring for someone or not. But I also noticed a good change in some workplaces, which was now like mental health days, right? Like days
Mhm.
for not like vacation, but hey, there's more stress, whatever, a mental health day. So could there be, other kind of things mixed into the mix? I mean, yes, it's very complex. And this is why, remember when I did that internship project, it was at the time when the US government was considering like it was called, what was it called? Family Medical Leave Act, right? And it was actually like a paid medical leave for families. And I was working at a company that was preparing. The reason I did the project is they were preparing in case it got passed as law, right? They were getting
Mhm.
ahead of the game and saying, what do we do? And actually our recommendation at that time was, why don't we just do some of this anyways? Right? Like that was
Right.
the thinking. And it was interesting because it's not, I don't know. It's a muddy place because time is money. And we do know that. But I think you highlighted a couple of ways. Like, are there flexible arrangements? Are there alternative arrangements? Are there, a couple of caretaking days that can be offered? Maybe it's not a lot, right? But are there things that we can do to try to um, balance a little bit, I think, in these challenging times? And I mean, here's the truth. You left corporate, right, to maybe be a caretaker. I think many people, I think myself included, I left corporate America to start my own company so that I also could gain some flexibility. And it's like, well, I commend you, right, and others like you. If everybody leaves corporate jobs to go and have more flexibility, that's not necessarily an answer. So, like, if corporate jobs don't come to a place of consensus, we could see more women leaving the workplace. And that imbalance is actually a little scary. Sorry. So what do you think? I don't know.
No, yeah, no, big point there. So we have officially reached the point of when people were like, baby boomers are going to be the largest population in America, right? And so we think of that. I always share this fact because I think it helps put things in perspective. When the first baby boomer was born, the life expectancy was 65 and retirement age was also 65. And so there was no planning or financial projections considering what happens after 65.
Yeah.
Essentially, retirement was meant to be a maximum of maybe 5 years. Now we're seeing these baby boomers who retired at 60, 65, and they're well into their 80s and thriving. There's also a large population of them who are not thriving, and they need a lot of care and support. And who's providing that care and support? Gen X and millennials, who are both in the workforce.
Yeah.
And so we have to consider what that actually looks like because we don't have the labor pool to support all of these elders from a medical standpoint. We have a lot of shortages across the board. We don't have the infrastructure for elder care in this country to support this many elders. And so a lot of that is falling upon families who are actively working and or raising children. And so we have to consider, I think workplaces need to consider that they're going to lose out on so many employees who have so many other obligations and responsibilities outside of work, and how that's going to impact, just everything, our country, our economy, our lifestyles, job access, job opportunities. Just everything. I think across every industry is impacted by this. And I don't know that I don't think enough people are understanding that or realizing that and trying to make changes to address that in some capacity. There are a few national initiatives that are trying to figure out how to support and provide more care resources, but a lot of these resources are meant for families and caregivers who are already doing the work. And that's not, yes, they need that. Absolutely, right? That's what I do too. However, they still have to show up to work. And so what are we doing from a workplace perspective of trying to support them a little more? One other point I wanted to make is you brought up the whole PTO thing for vacation days. And going back to my story about FMLA, so where I worked, FMLA and personal leave were unpaid, right? But you had job protection. And so what I had done, so when I took personal leave, I also took FMLA because my mom had surgery around the same time. So I spent 3 weeks here with my father-in-law and then flew home to spend 3 weeks with my mom. So I basically split like 3 weeks personal leave, 3 weeks FMLA. With personal leave, I didn't have the option to get paid. It was just unpaid protected time. But with FMLA, I had an option that I could get paid by using my PTO. Right. And that's what everyone who has a baby does at where I work too. Right. So they add up all of their vacation time so that when they're on maternity leave, they can get paid down on their PTO. Now, fast forward, I was getting married. We wanted to go on a honeymoon. I had no vacation days left. I had nothing I could use to actually support my life for big events in my life because I had to use all of it during FMLA. So I think a lot of workplaces like have these and I was grateful that my manager approved the time off unpaid, but it shouldn't have to come down to that.
Yeah. No, and it shouldn't be a choice. You shouldn't have to like give up vacation. I think I've always felt this way. And I was in a similar boat because I worked at like a smaller private company when I had my first child. And so we didn't actually have maternity leave. So I had to take like PTO and I got like 4 weeks of short-term disability pay, which was like, 50% of my pay. But yeah, you think back to that again, if you're having a baby, you might be able to plan. If you're having a wedding, somebody might say, well, okay, you can plan, but you can't plan always for elder care situations. Even the best planning, you might not be able to actually deal with that situation now. It could mess up your very good plans. And I think that's like an area that people, if we look back to COVID, there was like an emergency, paid leave plan that was put into place because people were getting sick. I will tell you, honestly, I had an employee who went out on COVID. She got her 2 weeks of time to recover and get well. I myself had COVID as a pregnant woman, and I tried to take that time, and I was told like, hey, who's going to do your leadership responsibilities? You're about to be on mat leave. And I was like, what? And it's so funny because I think people just don't think about what's happening, the burden on people, right? And COVID, obviously different times, but there were caretaking burdens on top of that, right? At that time where people were having to quickly leave to go take care of family members, right? That were sick.
Yeah. Both of my stories are from COVID.
So you think I learned something from that period, right? Like a contingency program. I think also what's interesting now that we've talked about this, you don't have to do something for everybody. Like there's not like everybody gets 2 weeks extra vacation every year. It's for contingencies. It's for specific scenarios that you could have programs in place that allow some flexibility or some pay time off. Maybe it's not 6 months, right? But maybe it's, hey, I have a small provision for people that need these emergent situations, right? Though that's an option, I think that's on the table. And employers don't have to quantify it per employee, like this massive amount of time loss every year, because that it is emergent based typically, right? It's not affecting your whole population also. So yeah, I am curious.
I think that's a really good point because a lot of times I've heard this many times of like, well, if I do it for you, I have to do it for the others. Yeah. It's like, well, I for sure hope they don't have to deal with this, but can this be an emergent exception? It shouldn't. I hope no one has to deal with this. But also, if someone comes to you and says their mom needs you, you should probably let them go.
Yeah. And also, I think it's like, if you are, going back to just employee retention, right? I think people don't think about the money that it takes to onboard, retain employees. You save more money retaining an employee than you do finding somebody new, recruiting and onboarding and starting over, and including the knowledge loss. So if you're able to provide any kind of a provision for employees, I think at this point, compared to nothing, people who go through this would be happy with something. You are more likely to retain them, right? And they're going to be you're going to be looked at as a company who cares about them, right? So Now, you never know where things are going to go in these situations, and somebody might leave the work.
Yeah.
But I think you build better rapport overall.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know we went a little deeper on this than planned, but I hope that everyone finds it really useful as much as I have. And I also was checking out your website because I love to see your services. And so everyone should go and check out Pooja's website. We will add it in the show notes as well, but it's aging-together.com, I believe, right? And then
Yeah.
you can check out all the great services. And I've even started to think, like, what should me and my family be doing? So thank you for this enlightening conversation. It was just wonderful to get to dig in on this with you. So I hope we see some positive change.
I know. I hope so too. But thank you so much for bringing me here and having me share.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone, and hope to see you again at the next episode of The Business of Success. Thanks for listening to The Business of Success. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about growth, value, talent, leadership, don't forget to follow along and share this episode with someone who is building something meaningful. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Customer X Success, which is helping organizations design customer value, build better and higher impact teams, and turn success into a growth strategy. You can learn more about Customer X Success at www.customerxsuccess.com. I'm Parul Bhandari, and this is The Business of Success, where success is built, not just chased. Until next time, see you soon.